On today's episode of Stronger Marriage Connection, Dr. Liz and I welcome Alexandra Carroll, and we dive into the deep emotion and power of grief and how it can impact our personal lives and our relationships. Alexandra shares her personal story of losing her mom unexpectedly at a young age and how that traumatic loss continues to affect her and her relationship story, including writing a book about grief entitled Untangling Loss After Grief. Alexandra Carroll is a grief advocate, author, and former professor with a PhD in theology and religious studies. After the sudden loss of her mother, Alexandra turned her focus to helping others navigate grief with honesty and compassion, inviting us all to talk more openly about death, dying, and healing. We hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome to Stronger Marriage Connection. I'm psychologist Dr. Liz Hale, along with the esteemed professor Dr. Dave Schramm. Together, we have dedicated our life's work to bring you the best we have in valid marital research, along with a few tips and tools to help you create the marriage of your dreams. We're so glad to have you here. You know, the topic today is grief, maybe a little heavier topic, but it's inevitable, right? However you look at it. There have been plenty of recent life experiences to grieve over as a nation, a community, neighborhoods, and even families. There has always been and there will always be grief. Dave, I think most people have long expected that grief comes in stages, right? You've heard them. What are some of them? First one, denial.
Denial, yeah. And then bargaining and all those,
Bargaining.
Back in graduate school, yeah.
Yes. In other words, the idea is that grievers complete each stage at a time, like climbing a staircase. Once they reach the top landing, grief should supposedly end. But does it? Our guest today, Dr. Alexandra Carroll, shares that while we appreciate when things can be wrapped up neatly, our insistence that grief tidily fit into a finite program may propel our unhealthy move on and get over with it tendency. Welcome to Stronger Marriage Connection, Alexandra.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you for writing a book on this very key topic. Would you please take us back to the beginning of when grief became your focus, probably 10 years ago?
About 10 and a half years ago now, yes. 10 and a half years ago, I was a relatively newly minted PhD in theology and religious studies, of all things. So I was studying suffering and healing and how people use art and literature to facilitate the healing process, really. And I was an adjunct professor in Washington, D.C., teaching peace studies and conflict resolution, which it ties in where you're big subjects, you're learning how to use different tools to heal really big divides. So I was teaching, college students how to, protest and do all these other things, but also giving them strategies for how to talk to people when you don't agree and when things are really fraught. And it's really all about the healing at that point. So at that point, my mother, I was living with my parents in Virginia, Richmond, Virginia, and my mother was having heart surgery. And, it was one of those things where she wasn't looking forward to it. Nobody was. And this was her second bypass surgery. And so she went in and we all went in together, which was great. Actually ended up being great that we all went in with her, my dad and I. And she had surgery on a Monday and surgery went well. And then 4 a.m. on Tuesday morning, we started getting phone calls about how the recovery was not progressing in a really good direction and things were going, from stable to unstable to more critical over the course of the next 3 days. So she was put on life support on Tuesday. And by Thursday, it was clear that there was no coming back without severe interventions, like amputating all of her limbs. That's where we were. And it's a little bit, probably too much detail. But anyway, so we took her off life support on Thursday, and we had the family come in. My mother's sister and her niece and nephew were there. So yeah, and that's I had 3 days. We had all had 3 days to really digest this and come to terms with the fact that this was happening. And so I had an academic response, which was to go research, to go look and read about grief and find out what exactly I was getting into. So I found some books. I started journaling a lot, writing about what I was reading and thinking and feeling. I talked with a lot of people, family members, friends, who had lost parents, mostly parents, at various ages in their life. And I tried a writing class as well, just to see how that would work, but it was too soon to process everything. So that didn't go anywhere. And then I was still looking for a full-time position, so I ended up becoming an academic advisor in Washington, D.C. and moving to Maryland. And my dad stayed in Richmond. And so I was working with kids, with students in college and listening to, their life stories too. And they're having experiences similar to and somewhat different from what I was having, but they were still going through trauma and suffering and trying to deal with all of that stuff while being at school at the same time. And so I just was making mental notes of things and really felt like I'm working on these academic articles, but I'm not really in that anymore. I feel like I want to write about something else. And so I just started making notes. My journal was just full of notes of things I wanted to write about and things I wish I had known and advice I wish that somebody had given me that I wish I could pass on to the next person. And then I really found myself advocating for my students too, both with their professors and with the other administration members, because they weren't really being listened to as well. Sometimes they were just sort of dismissed for just being kids having problems, but it's a little bit deeper than that. And it really permeates everything that you're doing. And so in 2017, I found myself engaged and we were debating where to live. And so it was, well, we could move to Washington, D.C., where I could keep my job and my soon-to-be husband could have found a different one in consulting, or he could keep his job in Vermont. And I'm from New England and was kind of interested in going back, but there weren't any jobs there. So I could look for adjuncting and write. And so that was where I fell. It was into that category of, okay, I'll move and I can write my book. And so it just kind of came out there. I finally had the chance with nothing really to do but write. And so it took off. And that really became the focus of kind of the next volume of my life at that point was grief.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And you and your mother were obviously very close.
Yeah, we were.
I mean, this is a devastating loss for you. I remember the loss of my own mother. Yes.
Especially at that point in time too. I mean, I wasn't young, but I wasn't older. I was sort of still trying to find my footing. And I remember saying when she was in the hospital that I just wish she would see me settle. That's the only thing I wanted. And it didn't happen. So, but I unfortunately have her to thank for this new trajectory, so it's very bittersweet. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't have this. So I don't know. It's one of those things. Yeah. It's the unfortunate trade-off.
Yeah. Wow. It's a great perspective on that, Alexandra. And as Liz mentioned at the top of the show in this introduction, there's so much, it feels like right now in our country with grieving, with loss, with death, dying, divorce. I have two friends who called me, just last, was it 2 weeks ago? Two friends who were going through a divorce. I'm going to a funeral actually this Thursday for a friend who passed away after a long, 10-year battle with cancer. And so, just very timely. It feels even very, heavy, but man, what an important topic. I'm looking forward to hitting it head on because people are, Alexandra, looking for resources for help. So I'm looking forward to our discussion. I learned in grad school about the stages of grief, right? The 5 stages, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, I think it was widely known. How accurate or helpful, have things evolved? This is not my area. So I'm curious, have we moved on? Is it still being used, that framework today?
It is. And it's still very relevant. I think, so the 5 stages Kubler-Ross developed while she was working with people who were just given terminal diagnoses. So she was following their response and their reaction to that diagnosis and the understanding of what's going to happen to them for however long they had left. And so what she noticed was this cycle of denial that progressed into anger, the bargaining, the depression, and then finally the acceptance. And if any of us have known people who are going through this, people get to a point where they're like, I'm okay. I'm at peace with this. I know this is going to happen. I don't want it, but I've accepted that it is, and I'm okay with it, which you kind of think is a little strange because why would you be? But you do get to that point, I think. And my family members have, that I've experienced, gotten to that point as well. And so what happened was that she then noticed that some of these same things were happening with the family members during the diagnosis process and after the loss as well, which is kind of to be expected. They seem, the denial of, I can't believe this is happening, or I'm not ready for this. I know I certainly am through that. And in the hospital too, of all things. And so later what happened was that it really became codified later on as a very rigid process that she didn't really intend it to be. It was just sort of an observation of how people move through different things. But for her, she was looking at the experiences rather than moving from A to B to C to D, and then finally being done with the process. So I think when it comes to the accuracy of how she captured the grief process, whether it's through because you've got a terminal diagnosis, or you're dealing with a loss or a divorce or loss of a job or anything like that, it's really accurate in terms of the experience of the grief process. But not accurate in terms of the model of step progression that you might go through. So you're not going to feel a denial one day and then the next day feel anger, and then the next day move past that into bargaining and be done with everything. It's really a cycle. I still 10 and a half years and I still can't believe my mother's dead. It's there are days when I think, oh, I have to call my mom, and I forget that she's not here. And so it still happens. So it's not something that happens and it's done with. But the process, the description of the cycle is really helpful as well, I think, because we can all understand what we might expect, and to know that what's even more helpful, that we're still going to go through this for years. It doesn't happen once. It doesn't even happen twice. It's a cycle that continues throughout the course of the rest of your life, really. It just gets duller maybe over time. The anger subsides. It's not as sharp, but some days I still feel it. So yes, I find them very helpful. David Kessler, who is a co-author with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and also a grief expert in his own right, he suffered some tremendous losses, his mother, his son. He's a wonderful resource at grief.com. But he recently wrote a book that talks about the 6th stage that he wants to add to this experience. I haven't read the book yet, but it's about finding meaning in life, which I think is a really important thing to add to this, because once you go through all of these things and you accept it, but now what do you do? And that was sort of my question that other people ask is, okay, this happened. My life is totally different. This isn't even a different chapter in the same book. This is a whole new volume. What am I supposed to do now? Who am I now? What experiences do I want to have now? Where is the meaning in my life when the person who was so much a part of my making meaning in my life before is not there to experience it? So his adding that 6th stage, I think, is really important to the discussion. And I'm surprised it hasn't been talked about earlier. I think it's kind of gone around in other areas, like with Holocaust studies, and Viktor Frankl talked about the real importance of finding meaning to be able to survive and move through a period of horrendous suffering, to be able to come out the other side and survive it. So I do think that adding that to the 5 stages is really important. One of the books that I found very helpful was a book called Grieving Mindfully, and it's by Samit M. Kumar, who is a Buddhist. And he talks about this idea of experiencing the cycle as a spiral. So it's like a seashell. It goes around in circles and it never really goes away, but it goes from being very tight and very painful and very strong in sensation to moving out and kind of dulling, not evaporating and becoming erased over a period of time, but just stretching out and becoming less sharp and less painful, but it's still there on a daily basis. And that, I think, is something that really helped me in thinking about these 5 stages as less of a ladder to climb and more of as just a spiral to kind of, some days are going to be worse than others. One day is going to be more painful. One day will feel a little better. And it's the closer you come to certain moments of your calendar, birthdays, holidays, special, anniversaries, special days that you celebrated with somebody. that's when you feel that stuff coming back a little stronger. But then when that passes, the spiral kind of gets larger. And so I think adding the spiral to the discussion helps a lot in making it a workable and helpful framework for people.
We'll be right back after this brief message. And we're back. Well, let's dive right in.
Something just surprised you still, right, Alexandra?
Oh, yes.
And I think a common misconception is that we all grieve the same. For instance,
Yes.
you and I both lost our mothers, and maybe that's where the commonality ceases, although I can find a lot of myself in your story, quite honestly. You know what catches me off guard, Dave and Alexandra, is so it's been, I'm trying to think, 14 years since my own mother's passed. Maybe longer than that. Goodness, closer to 20 now. What surprises me is when I'm out, let's say TJ Maxx or somewhere, and adult women are shopping with their mothers, and I'll hear one call to the other, "Mom, hey mom, look at this." I don't know what it is about that just makes me grieve inside. Just like, oh, I wish I had that option.
Yes. The first time I went grocery shopping after my mother died, I felt like I had a bullseye on me. Like there's a big neon sign that's saying "Dead Mother." And because I felt it so acutely, and every time I couldn't, it took forever to be able to go to places that she and I used to go to, because I would walk in and I would see, like you said, mothers and daughters, and it still hurts. It's still really painful when people talk about, going to visit family members. And I think that's really nice. I love that for you. I think that's great. And yes, it's not the same for people, and we share the commonality of the experience in terms of the loss of a person that's close to us, but there are a lot of different factors that come into play. Like,
talk about some of those, please. Yes, go ahead.
Who the person was to you. My dad and I lost the same person, but my father lost his wife and life partner. I lost my mom and my ride or die best friend right there. And so there were different expectations for that person in our lives. And so we weren't feeling the same way about it. He has different experiences with like moving that I didn't have, because I'd moved by myself before, but he hadn't done that in 46 years, I think. How the loss happened is different. A lot of people have, not everybody has somebody who ended up in the hospital the way I did. So it was sudden, maybe tragic, maybe it was an accident, maybe, there was some violence involved, maybe it was natural. And everybody's that aspect of it does matter too, because that affects how you feel about it. Did you get to say goodbye? Did that person get to say goodbye? Were you able to find some sort of, not quite closure, but way to kind of cap that moment as, I don't even know how to describe it, but I guess maybe closure is the best word for that. What is your relationship? Not everybody likes their mother. Some people don't get along with their mothers, and some people would be like, great, glad she's gone. But even if you don't like somebody, there's still stuff that you have to deal with. It's different than what I have dealt with and maybe what you've dealt with, but there's still other trauma maybe to go through. What is the view of death that your family had? How did you talk about it? Did you talk about it? Did you ever experience a death before, or is this the first one? What coping mechanisms have you been taught as a family? What have you picked up along the way? Are they healthy or are they unhealthy? What's your own temperament? Are you a person who likes to talk about things? Are you a person who hides everything inside and doesn't ever verbalize it? Or, how do you deal with the loss? How old are you? Are you 16, 12, 21, 40? I was 38. My mom lost her parents at 21 and 14. And she's still, 65 years old. She was crying because it was her birthday. And age, how old you were at that point when you really needed your mother, I think matters too, or needed that person in your life. How well do you bounce back from stress? What's your resilience level? Was that really something that was bolstered in you by your family? Did you find a way to bolster it in yourself? And what meaning do you think you can make of this? It's really hard to figure out what you're going to do. And some people get stuck in that complicated grief where that meaning just, they can't get past it. They can't get into that and forget that there is meaning after life. It's hard. I mean, after death. And it's hard to cope with that in the beginning stages of it. What is going to happen now? What do I do? Who am I? So there are a lot of questions that people ask, and they all have different answers to them based on where they are in the world, who they are, what their job is, where they're living, what their priorities are. And it's just something that everybody has to be patient with, because there's no one size fits all thing. Like, grief itself is universal in the experience, but the experience itself is really custom to that person and where they're coming from.
So personal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow. Alexandra, in your book, Untangling Loss After Grief, you have a section designated to, quote, the right to fall apart. You added that you felt criticized for grieving after your mother's death. It appears that death and our emotional response to it induces this fear and anxiety in our friends and family. Interesting. Why is that?
Yes. I felt a lot of pressure just to keep everything inside and kind of move on and not be emotional about it, not be sad. And so one of the things I think happens with, life in general, if you think about, horror movies, thrillers, anything that scares you, it's October. So there's a lot of, horror movies out right now, and horror movies, horror TV shows, the dreadful thing you're watching is far removed from your real life. So you are observing it. You're witnessing it. You're not experiencing it. You can think about it from a safe distance, and you can talk about it with people and laugh about it with people and be like, oh, do you believe this actually happened? That seemed a little bit too much. That would never happen in real life. So you can talk about it when it's at a distance, but the second that it happens in real life, because death is the realest of real experiences, there is no coming back. You cannot change it. You cannot fix it. There's nothing anybody can do. And it forces people to really deal with the scary things in life. And it's hard to talk about it. It's really easy to watch it, but it's harder to sit with somebody and feel like they're really going through that thing. And this is real. This isn't something I can put on pause or shut off if it gets too scary. I have to deal with this. And this other person who's grieving, I don't know what to do with this. You can't help anybody. And I think that helplessness bothers people who are trying to support grievers. I can't do anything. So I'm just going to tell you what I got was just go get on medication. Just go to therapy and you'll be fine. And it was like, that works well for you because it puts me in a separate place where you don't have to deal with my anguish. But that doesn't change anything for me because I still have to deal with it. And, the coping mechanisms that we have, they're built for short-term experiences. They're not really built for an entire lifetime. You can use them for a couple of days, for an hour, for a month, maybe even a year, but 30, 40, 50, 60 years, it's a long time to use a coping mechanism and to make sure that it's structurally sound. I mean, that has to be rebuilt too. And frankly, we're not taught as well, I think, to include death as part of the life cycle. We have life, and then there's death. And sometimes it seems like this is a punishment. Like, if you die young, you must have done something. Or, you were sick, you must have done something where, people look at what people experience in life. That's got nothing to do with it. All of this stuff is just random. It's maybe attached to lifestyle, but you're not going to blame somebody for their death. It's not their fault. The circumstances just led to that, and you can't do anything to change it. And so it's not as readily accepted as part of the life cycle. We were a little different in my family because I had, some relatives who were in Auschwitz, and we talked about the death as part of life cycle often. My mom went through loss early as well. And so I learned about this at the kitchen table, and this was not what my friends were doing. And so it was a shock to me sometimes when I would talk about these things and they'd be like, so how's the weather? And it's like, oh, okay, I guess we're not at that point to talk about that. Yeah, but death also is a change. It's a change. And you know how well we deal with change. We don't love it. We especially don't love it when we have no control over it. And not only does the circumstance of that person, that griever, change, but their life changes too. And for a grief supporter, they might not be able to handle the change they see in that person at all, because they're seeing maybe that person is becoming someone they don't know, and they don't know if they want to get to know that person. So they have to change themselves to adapt to a situation in order to be a good supporter. Lifestyles change, grievers change, and then our relationships change in accordance with that. It's just a natural kind of flow of everything. And people have a lot of difficulty with that. They don't want things to change. And so we try to say, I'm not going to deal with it. You're done. You're fixed, and let's just move forward as if nothing happened. And so I think that those are the main areas where the trouble really lies, of really being able to accept it as real. It's too real.
You talk about being a good supporter, Alexandra. How do we do that? Let's say someone we know and love is going through grief, someone close to them, maybe that we're not as associated with, but what can we say? What should we avoid saying? Do you have some tips and tools for us?
Well, I have many. This is my next book, I think. I am going to borrow a phrase from Hamilton, the musical. Talk less, listen more. And that's really all it boils down to. Don't say stupid stuff. You don't need to try and match the experience. Some things that I think people should avoid. I know exactly what you're going through. Someone said that to me. Her mother was still alive. And I was like, I don't think so. This was at the wake. I don't really think you do. They're in a better place. I love that one. Really? You don't think the better place would be at my daughter's 6th birthday party? I kind of think it would be different. Yeah. Or what the priest at the funeral said to me, which made me want to punch him, which I know is not the reaction you want to have, was, this is part of God's plan. Really? My dad's a mess. I'm a mess. People are being rude. This is really all of it? Are you serious? No, there's a reason for everything. That's one of my favorites. I mean, I know that's come out of my mouth for uncertain things, but what's the reason? Seriously? So I could write a book about this? I'd rather have my mom. One other one that's great is, you're not over this yet. It's been 6 months. It's been a year. And, my insert person here, my spouse, my sibling almost died once. So I know. Almost is not the same as the actual thing. My mom almost died a couple of times before. Not the same. Not even in the same ballpark. And the funny thing is, those last two things, a doctor said to me, one of my mother's doctors said to me, and I was just thinking, oh, okay. When they asked her how my dad was doing, and this was maybe 3 or 4 months after my mother passed. And I said, well, he's devastated. And she said, still? And I looked at her. It's like, it's been 4 months. This was his life partner. And she said, oh, I'm so sorry. But really, it's really, I think it's a little bit easier. Well, not easier, but the thing to do, honestly, is just to sit there. Just sit and listen. If they want to cry, let them cry. If they just want to sit and say nothing, let them sit and say nothing. Nothing has to be said. But I know what I wanted most was just someone to sit next to me and hold my hand or hug me and just let me cry. And that's all I wanted. And that's the one thing I feel like I missed out on. I had some people who did that, but not everybody. And that's really it. Just sit and listen and let them do what they need to do. And if you really feel like you need to say something simply as, I'm sorry that you have to deal with this. I'm sorry you're going through this right now. I don't know what to say. Just be honest. I don't know what to say about this. This is too big for me. I don't know what to say, but I want to be here. So I'm just going to sit. Ask to see pictures. Ask for stories. What's your favorite memory of this person? Tell your stories of your encounters with this person. One of the best things that happened in my grief experience was my boss, actually. He was the head of our department in the religion department at GW. And I had been emailing with, the administration, and I emailed him, or actually he emailed me and asked to meet with me. And he said, please bring some pictures of your mother. And I showed him pictures and we talked about her for half an hour. He'd never met her, but we had a great conversation. And that made me feel really seen. It made me feel like she mattered to somebody other than me, and that the experience that I was going through mattered. And he was like, wow, she's, and this was actually the picture that I showed. One of the pictures I showed him was the one sitting behind me. And he's like, wow, she was a beautiful woman. And we talked about growing up and the actual experience, I had with her. And it's as simple as that. We like to talk about the person we lost. We love it. We absolutely love it. And it does not make me sad to talk about my mom at all. I may cry, but that's because I love reliving the experience. So asking for stories is really helpful. And it can bring, connect you in a way that you maybe weren't expecting. So I think, listening a lot more than talking is probably the better way to go, as opposed to inserting, your foot in your mouth and saying something.
Mm-hmm. We can never underestimate just showing up and being there.
Exactly.
Right.
Just come over, just sit. Hey, let's watch a movie. Whatever. It doesn't have to be anything spectacular. It just has to be presence. Or just call over the phone. I had a friend who had a miscarriage once, and I called her and I said, she was crying. I said, I'm just going to stay on the phone with you. I'm not going to say anything. You can say something if you want to, but I'm just going to sit here with you as long as you want. And she just cried, and that was it. And it was great. It was helpful for both of us because I didn't know what to do. So
those are great. Yeah, great tips. Very concrete, helpful tips, Alexandra. Thank you. After your mother's funeral, the many, kindnesses and people being nice and the calls and things, they slow down, and you realize that you need to provide your own kindness. So we can't outsource self-care, or can we? What suggestions do you have for those who need self-kindness today?
I think you can outsource some things if you really think about it. So, for example, this week, we finally hired a cleaning service. And it sounds really basic, but I get 5 hours of my life back this week.
Yes.
And that's 5 hours that I can choose to do what I want. I can work a little bit more. I can rest. Maybe I can go for a walk. I can take care of myself. It's 5 hours I didn't have last week. And it's small things like that. They don't have to be huge. We also have a handyman company coming in to hang up some shelves because we just don't have time. And everything is just sitting on the floor, and it's making my peace of mind crazy. I don't have peace of mind. So having somebody come in and take care of the mess will help my peace of mind, help me be able to relax a little bit, take some of that mental load off of, I haven't gotten that done yet, or, I still need to do that. I keep forgetting. Small things like getting my hair colored. I did it by myself for a long time, and we moved, and I was like, I am not doing this anymore. I'm going somewhere. That's the first thing I did when we moved. I found a colorist. I'm going. Nobody can reach me. I can sit there. I can read a book. This is for me. Somebody's going to take care of me for an hour, and that's all I really need. Getting my nails done. I go more for the relaxation of it and being out of the house and not having to deal with anything. Nobody can. Again, I can't talk to you. I have wet nails. Sorry, can't do anything. Can't answer the phone. Getting a grocery delivered. There are some times when we first moved and I could not take her to a store. She's very active, and it was like a 4-hour process. And so I just was able to do a couple of grocery deliveries over the summer when she was here and not in school. And it helped. It took that mental load and that stress off. So there are certain small things you can do to outsource and treat yourself well that way. Get takeout. Some weeks it's just too hard to cook. And some days you just don't feel like doing it because you're exhausted. Get takeout. It takes that responsibility and that stress off of you. So there are small things we can do, but larger things. I think in this day and age that this self-care market has become so saturated with over-the-top self-care that nobody can actually do this. I can't go for a massage every day. I can't go for like a 4-hour pedicure. I do like the 30-minute and I'm out thing. I can't go on vacation every 2 weeks. I can't take a long weekend anytime I feel like it. So we really have to look at the basic things that we can do. And people will say things like, but that's just basic needs. You should be doing that anyway. Well, yeah, that's how you take care of yourself. Take a shower. Take a shower at a time when you don't have to rush out the door. Take one at night. Take a longer one than usual. Take a bath. Something where you don't have to hurry up and you can actually just sit there for a little bit longer, even if it's 5 minutes longer. Go to bed early 1 or 2 days a week. Take care of that because your sleep really matters, and it really matters for your mental health to get enough sleep. Go for a walk. If things are just getting too much, you feel stressed out, just take a walk. 5-minute, 10-minute walk. Doesn't have to be 40. It doesn't have to be an hour. You don't have to do a marathon. Just go for a walk. Quick walk around the block. Shake it off a little bit. No phone, no music, nothing. Just walk. I think like one of my go-tos, if my husband's going to a basketball game and my daughter, we were able to maybe like take her to one of those parents night out things, I will get takeout and I will watch a Hallmark movie. It's just, it's something small like that. Shutting off your phone. That's something that's really important. There are days when I just don't answer my phone and I just shut it off, put it away, and I'm done with it because I don't want to have to deal with, notifications of things that really don't matter. So it's really about taking the pressure off yourself so you can take a breath. It's not about 3 hours of meditation or, going on a 3-month cruise. It's small little things you can do every single day just to tell yourself that you matter and you care about how you feel about things. You care about your own stress level. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, like I said, these giant things, just small little things you can add to every day. Getting a coffee, going for an ice cream just because you had a bad day. Small things add up to really big changes.
We'll be right back after this brief message. And we're back. Well, let's dive right in.
I love your recommendations, Alexandra, on just finding the quiet on the daily and even fasting. You mentioned fasting from the grief, fasting from social media. Tell us a little bit more about how you do those.
Well, quiet is really underrated. It's another one of those things that people try to glamorize and maybe market a little bit more as here's a special quiet time you can go to a retreat, or here's a special app you can use for your quiet time. But it doesn't really facilitate quietness, really. And quiet is scary because you have to face yourself. And there are parts of us we don't like, parts of us that we don't want to have to deal with. And quiet brings up all of those feelings sometimes. I taught a Buddhism class over the summer once before I finished my degree. And it was an online class and I had them meditate once a week. And one of the kids was like, oh, I can't wait to do it because I'm going to find out unsolve this mathematical problem. And I was like, oh, okay. And so when I saw their journals, he was just like, I had the worst time because this was so stressful. I couldn't even think about math. All this stuff was coming at me. It does. It really does. And it's hard to sit with yourself in quiet and focus, because what do you focus on? There are so many different things to think about. And so being able to get that quiet helps you slow down your brain a little bit. And so the items start to reduce in their frequency and in their intensity too, because they don't have to battle with social media. They don't have to battle with work. They don't have to battle with the TV or with music. They can just come to the surface as they need to be, and you can deal with one at a time. And I think social media is something that I'm guilty of doom scrolling. I do it. And I every night I think I'm not going to do it. And then my daughter falls asleep and I think, I have 10 minutes. I'm just gonna, 10 minutes turns into 30. And so getting away from that, I think, is really helpful because it doesn't do anything but waste some of our time. Yes, some of the stuff is fun to look at and some of it's helpful. But then there are website or, content creators that do a lot for, let's say, motherhood, for example. And I look at those and I feel like a terrible person because I didn't, make my daughter lunch from scratch today, or I didn't give her like a 3-tiered cake for snack that was handmade or whatever. So social media can be informative at times, but it can also make us feel like we're just not living up to what we should be doing. And we forget that people stage things. People will stage their children doing certain things and looking perfect and making them look like the perfect mother. People will stage how, make me feel better. And this is the product I use to make me feel so much better. And then you try it and you're like, this is the worst. So it can lead us into different directions that we may not want to go. So just putting the phone down and stopping with that, even for a week, if you can, an hour, a day is great because it brings you back to reality. But also, grief needs a break too. You're going to be with this thing forever for the rest of your life. You don't have to rush it. It's like, it's a long-term relationship. There is no need to rush everything at once. And frankly, grief probably gets bored with having to be on you all the time. It doesn't have to be serious 24 hours a day. You can have a laugh. You can go out, watch a movie, watch a TV show, do something fun. You're going to be living with grief for the rest of your life. It's okay to take it out for a date night. Like, it's fine. The logistics will still be there. You can deal with that tomorrow. Go out, have a break. And that actually, when you come back, it's better. It makes it better. It makes you more able to deal with the grief from a different perspective because you've relaxed. You found a piece of quiet. You realize there's something that's been bugging you that you need to deal with, and you can, and then you do, and you can move to the next thing that's on your list. So yeah, quiet is one of those really very underrated, but very necessary things that we have difficulty finding in this day and age.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I realized you're 38 when your mother passed, and only then, after that, did you find love, marry, have your daughter who just turned 6, and the loss of those events, or rather the loss of your mother, had an enormous impact on those events in unexpected ways. You say
it did. Yes, you don't think about those things. You just think about the person not being there, but then you think about all the things that they're not a part of and all the ways that they would have been integral or just influencing that moment. And so, yes, my mother died when I was 38. I got married when I was 41, and I had my daughter just a week past turning 43. And so, when it came to getting married, I really wanted to elope. But why? The person who would have really, really enjoyed this, in my life at least, wasn't there. So why not just elope? But, I thought my husband's family, my dad really would have missed out on that. And that would have been a heartbreaking thing for me to exclude him from. So we did go ahead with the wedding. And it was, I didn't have any flowers. I didn't want any flowers because I'd been the house was full of flowers for so long that all I could think about was a funeral. So I didn't have any. I carried a bouquet made of paper flowers instead. And we had books as centerpieces instead of flowers. Dress shopping was something that I couldn't do with my mom. And she had all these plans. She'd always talk about all these plans about going to New York City and getting a dress. And I was like, oh, okay. So I wasn't living in Virginia, but I went to Virginia that was where our wedding was. And so, my friends weren't there. My bridal party wasn't there. Some family members were, but I didn't really want to invite them. It was a little bit stressful to invite some of them. And so I just happened to be talking about it to a neighbor of my parents who I had become friends with. And she's like, do you mind if I come with you? And I thought about it and I said, no, I really don't. I don't mind at all. And she came and it was great. But it was one of those things that you don't think about, like, oh, who am I supposed to bring? I don't know. And then, I cried the whole way down the aisle and people probably thought of, oh, it's the wedding. And it really wasn't. I was just really missing a big piece of myself that day. And there are aspects of me that my husband will never get to know. He will never see me and my dad and my mom together, as we used to be, just on a random day or on a holiday or for a birthday. So he missed out on all of that stuff. So like I said, there's a piece of me he doesn't really know because of that. And I tell him about it. We talk about it. But unless you really experience it, it's not really there. He knows my dad, obviously. We've been to the house that my parents lived in. But while we were getting ready to sell it. So he experienced it from that point of view, but not full of life. So when we go to his family, I feel a little bit of a pang of like, oh, I don't have this to go to anymore. And, I've talked to him about not having my family home. And he's like, well, I don't have mine either because my parents aren't living in the house I grew up with. And I said, but it's different. My dad's in assisted living. I don't have a home to go to anymore. So I feel a little bit disconnected, lost at sea, if you will, because I don't have that anchor anymore of that family home. And I have my father, thank God he's still here, because he is that anchor for the time being. But even he feels the same way. We don't really have a home. It's just his apartment. So, there are random experiences of me bursting out in tears and my husband having no idea what's happening. And one of the most random things, which wasn't, I guess, random for me, was we were watching a show. I think it was The Haunting of Bly House or something like that a few years ago. And it was a limited series. And I realized in the very last episode, this whole thing was just one giant meditation on grief. And I was hysterically crying for about an hour, not from sadness and pain, but because I really felt like they got it. And I felt like I watched my whole experience play out on TV. And he's like, can I do anything for you? And I said, no, this is actually a good thing. Like, this is a good release because this is exactly how it is. And so it's okay. I know I look crazy right now, but this is really a good thing. And this calendar of emotions that comes through the year, I always loved my birthday. I loved September, and I dread it now. I hate it. I kind of try to forget about my birthday because the person who made it special, really special, isn't here to do that anymore. My dad does, but it's not the same without both of them together. And so I focus on my daughter's birthday, and I overbuy. I'm overconsumption, I think, is something that people don't talk about, where it's that shopping therapy. Like, why do you need to have 1,000 lights out for Halloween? Well, because it just makes me feel better right now. And my husband's like, oh, okay, to do what you need to do. But like, there are lights everywhere. It's like Rockefeller Center for 3 months from Halloween till the end of January. But it makes me feel really good. And last year was a really hard year, and there were more lights than usual. So, it's things like that you don't really expect. And as far as having a child, I was not at all ready for doing that without a mother. I thought that I understood it, and because my mom did it without her mother. So I know I had model, but oh my God. There was the unexplained infertility, which really was unexplained. I was 41, let's be real. But it took a while. It took a long time. I started the process at 39, 3 years to get there. And I didn't have anybody to really talk to about it, who would really sit with me and talk about it for a long period of time, other than 5 minutes. So you really need a mom at that point. We did the planning and the nesting alone because our family wasn't there, but my mom would have come up. She would have come to visit. She would have even moved to be, near us. I was really looking for stories after my daughter was born of my infancy and of my mom and what she did. What did she go through this? How does she deal with that? And my dad could provide some context, but it was really my mom that I was looking for at that point. So that was really hard. And the holidays. The first Christmas was horrendous. I cried, sobbed for a week, every day for a week. And I just, my father did his best to try and calm me down, but I was hysterical because this was too much to have this little thing and not have my mom there to celebrate that. Like that Christmas, she would have really just, the gifts would have been like cascading through the doorway. And so I do find that overcompensation to kind of make up for that lack of her at holidays and birthdays, where I buy too much for my daughter because I'm making up for, I want it to be really special and for her not to notice this gaping hole that I feel. She doesn't feel it. She doesn't know. She never met her. So it's okay in that respect. But yeah, there are lots of things you don't anticipate. And I do talk to my daughter about her all the time, my mother all the time. And so she's comfortable. She talks about her, but then she brings up questions about death too. So it's like, here's this 4, 5, and 6-year-old who's trying to process this thing. And I'm thinking, am I doing too much talking about it? Is this okay for her? But yeah, then there's just sort of the daily, oh, I need to call my mom. Oh, I can't. And just things like that crop up in life that my husband is like, okay. So he just sort of sits there, and that's really his response is like, okay, just do what you need to do. So yeah, it was not something that you really think about. You think about just them not being there in the broader terms, but the small little things that you forget that they could have been a part of, that they're not anymore.
Mm-hmm. That's powerful. Wow. Alexandra, when transition kind of shifting to couples, you mentioned, you married. Do you have advice for, spouses, partners where one has had a loss and there could be a parent, someone else, to keep that connection strong? You know what I mean? Because that can be it can be a wedge, it can be a stressor that they tuck away, or what, can they say? What tips or advice do you have for couples, I guess, who are going through that? One of them is really grieving.
Yeah, I think, again, kind of going back to that talk less, listen more thing is really helpful. People just want presence. They just want you to sit and be with them. You might not understand everything, and you don't have to. But you do have to be willing to support them, and you can't try and rush them through it. You see a lot of things in Hollywood where, people will say in the storyline, it's been a year, you should go date, or it's been a year, you should go do this, or it's been a year, you should be over it. That's a really unrealistic way of looking at it. And so we can't put that in our relationships. It's been a year. You shouldn't feel this way at Christmas every year. It's been a year. You shouldn't have to worry. Your birthday's coming up. Why is it such a big deal that she's not there? Or her birthday, or that person's birthday is coming up. Why do you mean you still want to buy them a card? So I think the willingness to accept the ways in which that person has to make room for that presence. In the book, I call it setting a place at the table. And so really being willing to accept that there is going to be an empty place at the table for the rest of your relationship, or the rest of that person's life and the rest of your life with them. And being willing to accept that person's going to be there. And that grief is going to be also a new part of your marriage. It's there. You can't excise it. It's always going to show up. And I think also a willingness to change with your partner. We always talk about being willing to change anyway in a relationship as people grow, because life, you mature, but grief really forces growth in a lot of different directions. And your partner's priorities may change in a way that you had not planned for. Maybe they're in finance and they're like, I want to go be a park ranger now because I want to spend more time at home. And I don't feel like I get that with this current job. So I want to go do this, and it's not going to bring the same amount of money. Well, you have to talk about that. You have to understand where they're coming from and figure out if that's going to work, how it's going to work. And if it can't, how can you facilitate that need still without losing something, that financial footing. Lifestyles are going to change. You may want to do certain things at certain times of the year now that you didn't before. People may want children when they didn't want them before. And that's a big thing to think about. They may want more, as a friend of mine once put it, they may want more life in their life. And, relationships may have to come to a very crucial decision-making point. If this was the foundation of your relationship, we're just going to be the two of us, or I'm not going to have children. Do I want to do this? Can I do this for my partner? Or is this something that unfortunately we have to move apart because of it? So on having that understanding that things are going to change unexpectedly, and you have decisions to make for yourself and for yourself as a couple, and understand that you cannot fix anything that's going on. I think especially for a male partner, you can't fix your wife. You cannot fix your spouse. And you just have to be there. And that's hard it's been hard for both men and women to not fix stuff. But you have to live with it. It's a lifestyle now. It's not a problem to be solved. It's a lifestyle change. And I think one of the last things is really just to be aware of the grief calendar, and aware that there are certain times of year where you may need to step it up a little bit more and be a lot more empathetic, more compassionate than you may have had to be in the past, like holidays, for example, or birthdays. You may need to start bringing it up to 150% for a while, so that person feels special in a way that their lost person made them feel, and that they have that gaping hole now that just reminds them of how much love they did lose. So you can't replace it and you can't fill that, but you can try and bring some of that specialness to them in ways at certain times of year. And understand that even like the death anniversary, that person's probably going to be miserable, whether they realize it or not. Every March, I think, why am I so tired? Why can't I do anything this week? It's always March. It's always that week. And so my husband has to be like, okay, I'll just do, we'll get takeout tonight. Don't worry about it. Or we'll just do this, or like you go rest, something like that. So it's a lot of being more attuned than you may have thought you needed to be in the relationship. So it's kind of like taking everything, but like adding it to a next level, leveling up in a way.
Yeah, very helpful tips. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. And before we start our wrapping up questions, Dave and Alexandra, I just want to ask you a slight transition. Terry Real talks about this a bit from his relational life therapy. He's known for sharing the belief that none of us gets everything we want from our marriage partner. So he states that grief is an important, inevitable skill. Digesting grief is a hallmark of a mature person in a functional long-term relationship. I think that's just so interesting. For instance, I would love to have long, drawn-out conversations with my Ben. My Ben, not so much. That interests him, nada. So Terry suggests that we grieve what we don't have and embrace all that we do. What do you think about grief inside a good marriage?
Yeah, that's a tough question. That's a big one to think about. Everything has good days and bad days. And I think about my parents' marriage, and they definitely went through ebbs and flows, and there were jobs that were lost and family members who died. And, I guess kind of communicating that need, that thing that's missing, maybe not to the point where you're like, I need it, I desperately need it, and I'm going to wallow in this forever, but just being able to discuss that this little thing is maybe missing from my life, or I lost this job and, this is making me feel this way about it. Not because you're trying to fix it, but just because you want the person to know what you're going through so that they understand where you are. And not becoming a victim of it either, but just, this thing's making me really sad today. And knowing that we sometimes get really focused on the process of how we get certain things, and we forget that the result is what matters. And there are many different ways to get that thing that's not going to look the way you thought it should or that you wanted it to look. Like I did not at all envision about having to deal with IVF to have my daughter. And that sounds like a small thing, but it really is when you think about, okay, this whole experience is going to be different from that respect. So I have to grieve that aspect of it and really like, okay, but I'm still going to get her. I still get to be a mom, maybe not the way that, would have been more fun and less stressful, but I still get to do that thing. So, my academic career kind of crashed and burned because of, grief and life changes. And okay, so I don't get that, but I'm still getting to write books in a different context, but I get to do the thing that I still want to do. It just looks different than I had anticipated or planned on. So I think we have to kind of allow the process to be different and accept that the result can still be a version of what we wanted. It may not be the fullness of it, but that's kind of part of compromise. One person brings something to the table, you bring something to the table, and you make a third thing that satisfies both of you in that way. And so honestly, having a good enough friendship where you can talk to a person and be honest about that. And that in that relationship, wanting to hang around with that person, even despite the fact that you may not have this thing. I might not be living where I really wanted to live, but this is a great place. I love Portland. I'm happy that we moved here. Maybe not where I thought I'd be, but you know what? It's got everything I need. And it's a different version of what I thought my, late 40s going into my 50s was going to be. But this is pretty good. I can accept this. I like this. I like the path that it's moving toward. So I think there's a lot of acceptance in there, moving through those 5 stages we talked about. And that sixth thing that Dr. David Kessler brought in, which was finding the meaning in it, which is the important thing that can help you not get stuck on the process that you're missing or the thing that you didn't get exactly the way you wanted, but finding the meaning in what you do have and how that can still work for you and provide you with a very beautiful, full life.
We'll be right back after this brief message. And we're back. Well, let's dive right in.
Dave, anything you'd add on finding the good and focusing on the good in marriage?
Yeah, I do like that acceptance. Gottman and others have talked about. We like about 80%, of characteristics and things in our marriage. There's about 20% maybe that bugs us, or wishes was a little bit different, or their personality was this way instead of that way, or whatever that is. But I like the acceptance and those who focus on the 80% instead of dwelling on the 20% that can't change, won't change, or not willing to change, whatever that is. But Alexandra, I like that focusing on what you do enjoy. And this isn't, Portland, this isn't what I maybe thought was, but hey, I can find the good in this. Look at these things that I do love about where I'm at, where physically, mentally, spiritually, whatever that journey is. So that's really helpful. Thank you. Well, Alexandra, as we, first I want to talk about your resources, right? In addition to your book, that is really a griever's guide for creating a self-care plan, you also have a social media presence. Can you tell us where our friends here can find you most easily, and we'll add that to our show notes?
Sure. I'm mostly on Instagram. And so my handle is at Alexandra Carroll, but there's no E. So it's ALXANDRACARROLL, because there was already an Alexandra Carroll. And so, beggars can't be choosers. So I just decided to get rid of that letter. And that's really, so Instagram is really kind of my home base. I'm kind of trying to follow my own, advice about not being on social media too much and having that take over. So Instagram is where I try to do a lot of stuff. I have a Facebook page as well for AN Carroll and a website of the same name, ancarroll.com, which is woefully out of date. So I do have to update that. So hopefully people can have patience with the content. And I'm on Pinterest as well, because I put a lot of stuff on there that relates to what I've talked about: ways to volunteer, ways to find self-care, ways to give yourself a break, ways to journal, different things like that I bring up in the book as ways to approach grief and healing. And so that is also Alexandra Carroll minus the E on Pinterest as well.
Okay. Yes. And for our listeners, we will add those to our show notes, all of those links and social media handles. So please check those out. We like to end with a couple of questions that we ask all of our guests. First, Alexandra, what do you feel like is the key to a stronger marriage connection?
Not killing your spouse.
Sorry.
No, but seriously. Active listening. I mean, really listening, not just listening to say what you want to say, but listening to hear exactly where they are and responding to that need and what they're saying to you, even if you don't want to hear it. That willingness to grow that I mentioned in the context of grief, really being willing to grow and change as a person and mature, and take advantage of opportunities that don't feel like opportunities when your spouse may be pointing out some things to you that you are like, wait a minute, I'm fine. But these might be places where we can grow, and somebody else is reflecting that to us. And, we do have to look at ourselves every now and again. It's easy to look at other people. But willingness to grow together, willingness to let the other person grow too, and not be scared that they're growing away from you because they want to do something different. And I think, honestly, having a really good friendship, just being really good friends helps, because you can talk to people in a way that you don't take everything personally. You can be observant in ways that doesn't cut too much. And honestly, laughing at the absolute absurdities that happen in life, because life is really stressful enough, but then there are stupid things that happen, really ridiculous things that happen that you can't do anything but laugh about, because what else are you going to do to get through that? And some of the absurdities are stressful. Some of them come in the context of something that's really traumatic and hard. But sometimes there are things to laugh about, and you have to have a good laugh now and again, because otherwise it's too much to bear.
Man, amen. Well said. What about a takeaway message? We call it our takeaway of the day. Do you have a take-home message you want our listeners to remember from our discussion today?
Well, and I dropped my note for that. I wrote that down somewhere. What was my takeaway for the day? Oh, yes. Okay. So a takeaway for the day. I think maybe there are three things when it comes to grief, and in particular having to deal with grief in a relationship. Patience. Everybody needs a lot of patience because this does not end. It's a lifelong thing. And so the more patience you have with it, the better off it might work for everybody involved. Again, that willingness to grow and change, to let grief grow, or let grief give grief permission to change you a little bit. And for your spouse or your partner to be able to change with you or let you change and not be afraid of that. And I think lastly, that to remember that grief really isn't pain. It feels like it. It's really love. It's love that has lost its home. It doesn't have a physical place to land anymore. And to remember that what your partner is going through is really trying to handle an enormous amount of love that no longer has a place to live. And it is bursting them at the seams because they're now housing it. And it's a lot to take on. And it can rip you apart on certain days when that love is just, it's too big and doesn't have a place to go at that moment.
Wow. Grief is love that has lost its home. That's profound. Thank you, Liz. What about you?
Yep.
What's your takeaway of the day?
Besides that one right there?
Yeah.
That's powerful. All right. I think we can never underestimate the power of just showing up, of just being there, attending the funeral, sitting with someone who's crying, holding hands. That's really lovely, Alexandra. Just being there and talking less, listening more. I love that acronym WAIT, WAIT. I have it everywhere. Why am I talking? To remind myself that. And Dave, what is your top takeaway from our conversation today with Dr. Alexandra Carroll?
Yeah, so helpful. So many just practical tips, the stories, the examples you've opened up and shared. Thank you so much for your sharing your story, and then so many helps. It's kind of the so what, and you've shared so many so what's and what's next tips. I think I had never heard of so much, but the one that sticks out is the grief calendar, a grief calendar, and then the attunement. I love that word, attunement. Just being in tune. Mother's Day, Father's Day, birthdays, these anniversaries. Anything that I need to be aware of, or my partner, or whoever, I need to be aware of what's happening in this person's life. Yeah, that is. I was just going to shout out Liz right here. She's so aware of things that are happening. She's so thoughtful and mindful. So I don't know if she keeps it on a calendar somewhere. I need to do better of that, of just noticing, being attuned, awareness of what's going on in another person's life. But love the idea of a grief calendar. Thank you.
So thank you.
Well, Alexandra, you've been more than generous with your time, with your expertise. Thank you. Thank you sincerely for.
Well, thank you for having me.
Time with us today.
Mm-hmm.
It was a wonderful experience. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, friends, that does it for us here at Stronger Marriage Connection. We will see you next time. Thanks for joining us.
Mm-hmm. And remember, it's the small things that create a stronger marriage connection. We'll be seeing you soon.
Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, do us a favor and take a second to subscribe to our podcast and the Utah Marriage Commission YouTube channel at Utah Marriage Commission, where you can watch this and every episode of the show. Be sure to smash the like button, leave a comment, and share this episode with a friend. You can also follow and interact with us on Instagram at Stronger Marriage Life and Facebook at Stronger Marriage. So be sure to share with us which topics you loved or which guests we should have on the show next. If you want even more resources to improve your marriage or relationship connection, visit strongermarriage.org, where you'll find free workshops, e-courses, in-depth webinars, relationship surveys, and more.
Each episode of Stronger Marriage Connection is hosted and sponsored by the Utah Marriage Commission at Utah State University. And finally, a big thanks to our producer, Rex Polanis, and the team at Utah State University, and you, our audience. You make this show possible. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the Utah Marriage Commission.